Well, here in Australia, I very rarely have good things to say about our politicians, and quite frankly, that's with good reason, because there aren't very many decent ones. But that's not to say there are no decent ones. And we have a wonderful MP in South Australia who is fighting the good fight, I'm sorry to say, solo. Her name is Sarah Game. She stood alone against one of the most awful pieces of legislation that I've seen come through a state in Australia recently, and that is saying something. And Sarah Game, MLC, joins me now. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me on the Topher Project.
Thanks so much for having me.
It is fair to say that you literally stood alone as the only MP in South Australia. We're talking at a state level, of course, here, not about the federal MPs from South Australia, but at a state level, you stood alone against an awful piece of legislation amending emergency powers in South Australia. Unfortunately, there would be a lot of people, even South Australians, who wouldn't even be aware of this legislation. So can you start by briefing us a little bit? What was this bill? What does it do? And why were you so opposed to it?
Well, that's right. Well, so to confirm what you already said, I absolutely was the lone person in the South Australian Parliament against this piece of legislation. And I have noticed a recurring theme with that, by the way, which is that when I am alone in the Parliament, I'm actually definitely more with the people of South Australia. It's always well received. So the Parliament's definitely out of touch with the community. What I want to make really clear is that what's happened in this last week in the South Australian Parliament is actually step two of a really significant power grab by the Labor government, where they're diminishing the rights of the South Australian people to stand up against any abuse of that power.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt this interview with Sarah Game, MLC. We will get back to her and what's happening in South Australia in just a moment. But first, my name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and this is what I do. I bring you stories that other people aren't covering so that you can stay up to date with the world as it changes around you. Now, I am 100% viewer supported. So if you appreciate this kind of Australian content by an Australian, for Australians, about Australia, then please get behind the Topher Project by buying me a coffee via the button at topherfield.net, and also checking out my books, DVDs and merch. There's Good People Break Bad Laws, which is all about civil disobedience in the modern age. There's Good Christians Break Bad Laws, about the theology of civil disobedience. There's Battleground Melbourne, the DVD of what went down during COVID in Melbourne. And there's a range of different merch designs in a whole bunch of different styles: hoodies, long sleeve t-shirts, some designs on the back, some on the front, a range of different ones, some designed to be funny, some designed to be provocative, all of them designed to start conversations. And everything you buy will help me to keep the Topher Project going. So head over to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com and check out everything there. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to this interview with Sarah Game, MLC.
That first step happened by stealth, largely back in 2022, when the Premier stood out on the steps with a couple of other politicians that had helped a piece of legislation pass to really announce, hey, look, we have lifted the emergency declaration after 793 days. And what really upset me about that announcement was how misleading it was to the South Australian public, because they were really celebrated for that. You know, Peter Malinauskas and the other politicians, well done you. You've lifted the emergency declaration 793 days. We are free. We've passed this piece of legislation, Public Health COVID Amendment Bill or something like that. But what that bill actually did, and it's important to look back at that because this is part two of that step, what that bill actually did, they did lift the emergency declaration. But what that bill did was say, hey, look, we're going to lift it for now. But in future, if we make another emergency declaration, we can do everything we just did. We can act with low accountability. We can overreach. We can have no transparency. We can have no accountability. But what we're going to do is just make sure we strip you of more of your public liberty rights and safeguards, so that we're less, we can be more heavy-handed and act without such restriction. And so that was actually the first piece of legislation that I'd ever dealt with, and it was really interesting to see what actually happened to the legislation, what actually happened to people's rights, and what was actually reported in the media. And when that went on social media, there were so many people congratulating Peter for getting us out of that emergency declaration, but actually he'd stripped people of their actual rights. This is part two. So this is part two of that power grab. So they started the stripping back then, but part two basically says, okay, one, now we can employ all those powers, but we don't even have to have an emergency. We can just think an emergency might be coming. Now, we don't have to give any evidence as to why we think that, but emergency might be coming. And so we're going to declare a state of alert, all right, so that we can have all these emergency powers back. and we're going to broaden our powers just a little bit. So that's basically what happened.
Well, the only thing I'm going to disagree with you there, Sarah, is the just a little bit. I'm going to go through some of the specific clauses with our viewers here in a moment. I don't think this is a small increase, but for context for all of my viewers, which are, of course, Australia-wide and indeed worldwide, I would liken this to the permanent pandemic powers that were passed in Victoria around about the same time, actually, as that step one that you're talking about in South Australia, where in the case of Victoria, the government gave itself powers to invoke an emergency just because there was a potential for a pandemic. There didn't have to be an actual emergency. As is the case with this new legislation in South Australia as well. And they gave themselves tremendous power to violate human rights. I want to come to a couple of specific clauses here. This is actual legislation, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, this is now in place, in force in South Australia. Is that correct?
Well, it's certainly, yes, it's been passed, and yes, it's going to be enacted. That's absolutely right. And I just got, well, you might have to read it out because I've got a small screen, but I can see certain aspects of it, class of persons. Look.
So, sorry, I apologise. I put up the wrong one first. I wanted to start with this one. Right. This is a subclause under Section 25 that says that the authorised officer may exercise or discharge any of these powers even if to do so would contravene another law of the state. This is essentially, I mean, to put it in James Bond terms, doesn't this constitute almost a licence to kill?
Well, what they are doing is saying, look, we can break laws and we can get other people to break laws, you know, if we decide that we need to. But just to comment on what you said a moment ago about whether it's a small step or not, you're right. I mean, it is a significant step, but I guess it relates back to understanding what powers they actually gave themselves back in 2022. And I just do want to make sure that people do understand that the state coordinator is allowed, or authorised officer can actually enter, break into land, building, structure, vehicle. They may remove or destroy any building, structure or vehicle, animal or thing. That a person may be submitted to a decontamination procedure, remain isolated, segregated, directed to undergo medical observation or diagnostic procedures or treatments, amongst other powers. So just to be clear how extreme it is, I mean, that's been in place back in 2022, and now they're saying we can do that and more, and in more circumstances more broadly.
Yeah, well, you're not wrong. Those are extreme powers. So coming to that second part here, they can give a direction or a requirement by an authorised officer under this section, which may do any of the following. It may apply to a person or a class of person. This flies in the face of so much anti-discrimination legislation that we have in this country, where you cannot treat people according to their class or certain attributes. May require a person or class of person to act in contravention of another law. And it may affect the lawful rights. So this even abrogates human rights, explicitly saying an authorised person, when there is a potential emergency that has been declared, a state of alert, I think is what it's referred to as in the legislation, essentially you have no rights as a South Australian at that point. Am I taking that too far?
I'm not sure what rights you've got, to be honest. You've certainly got incredibly limited rights. I mean, I put up 10 amendments because I knew this piece of legislation would pass, unfortunately. And if people were to know the sorts of things that we rejected, I mean, I just want to give a couple of comments. But, for example, they've got the power to require information or documents. Now, the legislation said things like power under this section must be exercised in accordance with any prescribed requirement. Now, I just wanted to add in legislation like, or wording like, and in a manner that is reasonable in the circumstances. Now, my parliamentary colleagues in the government wouldn't even allow wording and in a manner that is reasonable in the circumstances. So I knew these powers were going to go ahead. I knew these authorised officers or state coordinator was going to be given these additional powers in these circumstances, but they didn't want to allow that language or actions that are appropriate in the circumstances. I mean, those amendments were all shot down with one vote only, which was obviously from myself. Yeah.
Just incredible, Sarah. And I applaud you for standing in the way that you have. I want to draw attention to one last point on this. At the very bottom there, subsection D, a direction or requirement may be issued in the form of a written instrument or in any other form, including without limitation, orally, by SMS or email. So what they're literally saying here is that your phone could buzz and you pick up your phone and you read an SMS that could be directing you to break the law, to violate your own or other people's human rights. And now if you fail to break those laws or violate other people's human rights, you are yourself in contravention of these new powers. This doesn't even seem like it works at a practical level, Sarah.
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is how do we even know that message is legitimate? You know, it's exactly. Certainly open to abuse, isn't it, from people? And what are my parliamentary colleagues in the South Australian government predicting for South Australian people? You know, what do they know that I don't know that's coming? Because they wanted to prepare for a very long, complex emergencies. I mean, I thought by their very definition, really, emergency was sort of something that happened for a short period of time. But clearly they're planning for long, complex state emergencies, and that should concern everybody, considering their stripping, safeguarding legislation from the South Australian public.
Well, Sarah, all I can say is more strength to your arm. How do South Australians that care about South Australia and that want to support you as literally the lone voice against this terrible piece of legislation, how can they get behind you and support you in your fight on their behalf?
Yes, well, look, I want to draw to their attention, I guess, one, that I'm in Parliament. I mean, a lot of people don't take an interest in politics, which is fair enough. But if you do, or if you are now, I'm in the Parliament. I'm not up for election until 2030. But what I have done actually is for this coming election, because I want to give people a choice, and there isn't any choice at the moment. I have started a Fair Go party. I've got really good candidates. So certainly look up and be aware that this coming election, there's actually going to be a choice for you of similarly aligned people, and we might be able to hold the balance of power next election and actually make some difference. Other than that, certainly they can contact me for the game office at parliament.sa.gov.au email, because I'm starting a petition on this, and I want some accountability.
Fantastic. So I'll put that email address into the description of this video and make sure that anyone who's in South Australia who wants to participate in that petition or wants to get involved in politics, not necessarily as a candidate themselves, but to support those who are willing to do that, can get in touch with you. Sarah, go well. Thank you for the work that you are doing, and thank you for coming on the Topher Project.
Thank you so much for having me on.
That was Sarah Game MLC, a rare gem amongst a sea of mediocrity there in the South Australian Parliament. Please support the Topher Project, because my name's Topher Field and that's what this is, the Topher Project, by buying me a coffee via the button at topherfield.net. And also please head over to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com, where you can check out my books, my DVDs, and my full range of merch, including hoodies, t-shirts, long sleeve tees, and there's some other stuff on the website as well, goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. The algorithm loves you, and so do I. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. But most importantly, and as always, think free.